Good morning, everyone. Good
Good
morning.
morning. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Good morning,
Morning,
everyone.
morning, sir.
Yes.
Morning, this is Rommel. Good morning.
Morning, Prof. Rommel.
Morning,
Morning.
sir Ace.
In already, and we have plenty of attendees already. So let's start the program for today. I would like to welcome everyone to this series number 5 of the Anti-Terrorism and Lecture Series and webinar of Security Matters, hosted by ACET. For today's webinar or series the topic is countering terrorism in Southeast Asia on the 18th year after 2002 Bali Bombing. No. We have speakers from Indonesia and from the Philippines who will be sharing their experiences and challenges in the community-based practices. So we have a different approach now, and this is really related to countering violent extremism also. The Anti-Terrorism Lecture Series has been started by Securitymatters years ago. And during this COVID-19 period, we focus on webinars so that everyone can attend and really share on the topics. So to those who attended the Series 4, where we have speakers from Singapore, this time we have very inspiring and dedicated professor and a doctor in fields of terrorism, and he will be sharing to us about the Bali bombing. For me personally, Bali bombing or the event that is very close to me because that shifted my career towards the hotel industry. And then from there, I shifted to Shangri-La Hotel Group, and then I covered Asia Pacific and Middle East. So Bali bombing, just like yesterday, is already 18 years. So we are so fortunate to have our speakers today. So for some house rules, house rules are that please check your internet connections. If it's unstable, try to disconnect other unnecessary devices, especially your video. They eat a lot of bandwidth. And then if you are using two devices, make sure the one is off or it is in mute so that there will be no feedback and then no struggle in your bandwidth, especially if you're streaming from one router. Please use your earphones or external microphones for better audio. Make sure to test your microphone and speakers first before you ask questions later. But we encourage you to put your questions in the chat box. So again, if your if your internet is low, please disable your video. And also check your background that is not distracting to others, especially if you use your video. Mute your audio by default, particularly when you're not the one yet called to speak, so that there will be no distractions to our speakers and others. Introduce yourself before you start talking to our audience so that we will know how to address you also. Speak one at a time by raising your hands or sending your questions through the chat box. Please indicate whom the question is for because we have two speakers. And the Q&A will be after the second speaker. Get in touch with the host for any comments and concerns. So your host now is me, Ace Esmeralda, and we have Securitymatters under Lai Esteban also in support. So if you want to react, if you are familiar already with your Zoom settings, you can see that there are reactions there. So you can use your emoticons there, and then there are non-verbal feedback also for this Zoom meeting. So during the Q&A, please raise your hand so that the host and the co-hosts can see see you and acknowledge you. So let me now introduce to you our first speaker. Or probably I should introduce myself. I am Ace Esmeralda. I recognize that we have audience here from other countries. I am Ace Esmeralda. I am the Chief Resilience Officer of Resilient PH. We support this event. And our sponsors for today is Ace and Associates that provides holistic asset protection management consultancy services with emphasis on convergence in all aspects of security from conception to implementation. And next is Securitymatters. Is a security and safety news network and data aggregator, a leading source of information about issues covering global, national, and socio-economic security matters that affect the Philippines, and now it's regional. With a unique, and also we have Arslan Security that has been providing the best-in-class total security solutions to the wide range of corporate and entertainment clients globally since 2010. So you can research more about Arslan SRS, and they have an office here in Philippines called Arslan SRS Philippines. And also Resilient Page, one of our sponsors, where I belong to also, is that it's a startup multi-platform social enterprise dedicated to information sharing and collaboration across stakeholder groups to advance the cause of resilience programming throughout the Philippines. And also Resilient Page have started already opening to other countries in Asia Pacific. So we are grounded, no? ResPH is grounded on the belief that the vocalness of volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world should be addressed with vigilance, understanding, collaboration, and actions. Next. And also, one of our partners in Anti-Terrorism Lecture Series is the Philippine Institute for Peace, Violence, and Terrorism Research. It is an independent academic research institute and a non-government, non-profit, and non-partisan think tank. It promotes the principle of non-violence and upholds the culture of peace by conducting rigorous investigative studies, intelligence analysis, and peace research to understand the pathologies of terrorism in the Philippines. So together with AAA and Securitymatters, PIP-BTR conducts this ATLS. So expect more of ATLS in the succeeding months and years. So I would like also to recognize the presence of Danny Chan. Danny Chan is my region head in ASIS International. And thank you for the presence, and also for others from ASIS International who attended here. My colleagues my colleagues who are fellow certified anti-terrorism specialists, we welcome you here. Those are attendants here that I may not be able to recognize. I welcome you here, and I will chat with you as soon as I see you in the chat box. Thank you very much for your presence. Now, I would like to introduce our first speaker. Our first speaker is a peace builder, a writer, and a filmmaker who specializes in de-radicalization and counter-terrorism. Through research, arts, and civil society's initiatives, he is developing the means to rehabilitate former terrorists and reincorporate them back into mainstream Indonesian society. Our speaker was inspired to get involved in peace building after the 2002 Bali bombings, when he learned that his former classmate has been involved in the attack. Inspired by the work of Northern Ireland's-based NGO, he encountered during his time in Chevening. He founded the Institute of International Peace Building, which aims to tackle terrorism and promote peace through dialogue and social enterprise. His varied career has spread across journalism, filmmaking, and public speaking. He has delivered a series of international lectures and a TEDx talk, produced 3 documentary films, and written 2 books, all on a series of interlinked topics related to terrorism, violence, and gender. So before he applied for his Chevening scholarship, which is very, very prestigious one, he was working as a special correspondent for the Washington Post. The 2002 Bali bombing, for those who have not yet been born during that time, which left 202 people dead, was a turning point in his life. It is also a turning point of my life. No? Personally, I've told you earlier. So as a journalist, he was shocked to learn that he knows a lot of people in the Islamic boarding school that have been part of the terror attack. So those are the transformative years that our speakers have experienced. And I'm sure our speakers ready now. I would like to turn over and introduce to you Dr. Noor Huda Ismail. He's the visiting fellow of I lost my screen. Okay. He's a visiting fellow from Rajaratnam School of International Studies in Nanyang, Singapore. And he's the founder of Ruang Gobrol ID. Ladies and gentlemen, let's hear and give the time now to our first guest speaker, Dr. Noor Huda Ismail. Take away, sir.
Okay, good morning and thank everybody and thank you Esmeralda for the kind introductions. So I think every one of us has a special connection to this very issue of violent extremism. Like the first Bali bombing was turning point in my life, It has a very personal connection. I have a very personal connection to that issue. So when I was small, I would be naughty. So my dad sent me to an Islamic boarding school as a way to discipline me. I didn't like the school. I had to sleep on the floor. And then I have to eat rudimentary food. I had to queue. I cried a lot. And then I was approached by a man who said like, it's okay. You will be fine here. I will help you to survive. And quickly he became my idols. And I learned a lot from him, how to read Quran, speak English, martial arts, and all of this stuff when I was 12. Within a 6 years of period, he became like kind of idol. I want to be like him. So I was in that very school without the knowledge of my dad, apparently as part of the network of radical school. The founder of the school, also the founder of Jamaah Islamiyah, Abu Bakar Bashir and Abdullah Sunkar. But when I was there, they left already in Malaysia as a way for them to, to escape the prosecution from my Indonesian government. But I met these two before they left to Malaysia. So as you can see, the school itself is very special, and I know most of these people. They are normal individual. I play football with them. I eat with them. Hang out with them. So like and then after my friend, my idol got scholarship to study in Pakistan, I was not selected because I was cheeky. I had a date with the daughter of the school. They expelled me. They punished me because they considered me as a morally tainted. So I was not selected to that scholarship program. I was unhappy. And then I continued my normal life, I would say. 15 years later, when I worked for Washington Post covering the story, to my surprise, in a press conference, police distributed a leaflet and wow, apparently my own roommate, the guy who I look up here as my idol, was one of the Bali bombers. I was shocked. I left the press conference. I don't know what to reconcile with the shocking realizations. And since that, I have very personal question: why normal individual like my friend who read Quran, nice to me, and then loving husband, and then very respectful to his parent, end up become involved in such an atrocity? And then as a journalist, I cannot ask the same question all the time, right? So I have to cover a number of different stories. But that question make me cannot sleep well. So then I need to have a better understanding than just as a journalist. I'm not trying to underestimate being a journalist, but as being a journalist back then, I have to cover so many different stories. I have to cover tsunami, I have to cover traffic illegal logging, I have to cover election, things like that. But what was dear to my heart back then was, how could you explain this? Then I applied British Chevening Scholarship. I studied in the UK, specifically study in this very subject in St. Andrews University. And then I did a research in Northern Ireland. It was my epiphany in Northern Ireland when I was there there is a two kind of a city, but divided into two, the Christian and Catholic. They have been fighting for almost 700 years. But I met one of the tiny NGO trying to help those back then who will call us a terrorist to go back to society. Then I said to myself, hang on a minute, if this NGO can help this farmer to start new life, I want to do exactly the same. So after finishing that master in San Andreas University, instead of joining the fancy organization, I started off my tiny NGO initiative called the Institute for International Peace Building, because I strongly believe that no one is born a terrorist. So being terrorist is required processes, and we must do something to prevent that things to happen. So, and there was no, book for dummies to deal with the terrorists. So I just tried, and I made a lot of mistakes. But gradually I learned that many of those who become terrorists, they start off their career not because of an ideology, because mainly, at least in Indonesian context, mainly because of an existing social network. They belong to a specific network. They are linked to friend, father, friends mainly, father, teacher, and a family, and that bring them into this very specific community. While they join the community, then they started to pick up the ideology. If it's the case, then we need to give them a completely different setting of social relations. So in Indonesia, after failing a lot, I help one, this is therefore this has a strong connection with the Philippines. Therefore, I have a lot of work in Southern Philippines, because the most successful client of mine is a former of Indonesian JI member who fought in Philippines for 2 years. His name is Mahmudi Haryono alias Yusuf. He fought there for 2 years, joined the military training by JR. Of course, involved a number of atrocity, a number of direct confrontation with the military, with the Philippines military. But when he came back, my government arrested him because for storing explosive materials. But while inside the prison, I interviewed him, and then after release, I helped him to go back to normal life. And this is what I really want to share. There are three approaches that I have been working on. The first approach, I call three things, I call it triple H. The H number one is hard. To talk to these people, because we strongly believe that no one is born as a terrorist, we have to win their heart, earning their trust first. Don't talk about the ideology, don't effort to challenge their narrative, you got to win their trust first. I have a unique privilege because I used to be part of their network when I was young, when I was a teenager, from 12 until 17 years old or 19 years old. So I kind of understand their psyche. So I know how to speak into their lingua franca. I cannot understand their cultural reference. So there is my unique position, but you don't have to be one of the network so you can understand. But you can study, but you can understand earning their trust. So earning their trust will be critical. In my case, I work a lot inside the Indonesian prison. So I visited them, I talked to them while they are incarcerated inside the prison. So earning their trust is very critical. So number one will be hard. Number two, I will call it hand. You have to transform their skill, give them something that become meaningful. Because these people join for this kind of a terrorist organization, searching for significance, searching for meaning, and they have been socialized with a narrow understanding how to be a good man, which is to be a fighter, to be mujahid, to be jihadis. And that is problematic. This is what I call it toxic masculinity. This is my PhD all about, later on I will come. But this is number two, which is giving them meaning, giving them skill. In the case of Yusuf, I transform his skill from using AK-47 to fry duck. Because in Indonesia, I'm running a restaurant, so I channel their energy there. Because as Albert Einstein has said, you cannot destroy the energy. What you can do, only channel them the energy, give them a different meaning, different outline. As I said earlier, many of these people join the network because of their social network. And if you are working in a cafe, if you are working in a restaurant, if you are in a completely different setting, especially in hospitality industry, one thing that you have to do is you have to respect embrace so many differences. You cannot have a solid one only customer. So if you work in a restaurant, you have to bow, you have to respect, you have to serve, celebrating the difference. And this is gradually transformed Yusuf. So from my approach in this case, if I borrow the term by my supervisor, John Horgan, he called it disengagement. I disengage him first from the use of violence before de-radicalize him. So to me, disengagement must come first rather than de-radicalize. So after earning the trust, number one, give him a skill. He has something to do in a daily life, in a community. When he get up, he knows how to go. And then lastly, this is the most important part, what I call it head. I start to challenge his ideology, which is head, which is, then we engage, give him a completely different and alternative interpretation of what meaning to be a good man, to jihad and things like this. Because for them to be a good man, you have to be a fighter. But to be a good man, you can be anything. You can be a good husband, you can be a good servant, you can be a good teacher. So different multi-interpretation of being a good man, of being a masculine. For them, it's just single and very narrow. I have to be mujahid. I have to fight. Which is in Islam is we cannot erase the teaching of jihad. But there are so many interpretations of jihad depending on two things: times and context. So it is very important. So after Yusuf, this is the guy named Yusuf, renowned his violence. Now, this is my next initiative now that I want to share with you, because my latest initiative, what I call it, because the trigger of this initiative is the ISIS, the declaration of ISIS has changed the landscape of recruitment, the way people join the violence, which is not merely social network, but also using social media. Here I want to focus my initiative, which is therefore now I want to share my screen on my recent initiative and how my campaign called Credible Voice. Because people like Yusuf has a credible voice. He has the potential to challenge the narrative of young people or those who flirt with the violence in the internet space. Because he fought, he was arrested, and he saw the hypocrisy of the group. And then he wanted to start new life, and now he has an identity. So I use the voice of people like Yusuf in a media platform, because my previous background as a journalist and a filmmaker, so I use a documentary films, especially documentary film and media and social media here. There is a community platform called Ruang Ngobrol. It's an Indonesian term. Ruang means chat, as a room, ngobrol meaning chat. So basically, I will be there for you to chat anything that you like to do. So now, what is Ruang Ngobrol? So the problem, as I said earlier, why I need to embark on this very issue, because the declaration of ISIS in 2014 has changed the landscape, as I said earlier. So we are seeing the rise of online radicalization for what? First, for propaganda. And then second, for recruitment. And then coordination. And these three is part of my PhD thesis on masculinity, the rise of the Indonesian foreign fighter on the mass, because they use a specific, especially specific, like a narrow interpretation of being man, which is using I call it militarized masculinity. There are similar ways of how to attract young people to join the group using a masculine narrative, and you can see in the picture, using AK-47, you look cool, especially in Southern Philippines. I did a number of research there. I interviewed almost 40 young Filipinos who joined Maute group. And to my surprise, again, going back to my theory, not that surprise, most of them have a very few and very shallow understanding of Islam. They join because of social network, they join because of existing condition, they join because part of the culture carrying, like a gun, it's a machoism, it's a part of, the culture also, what they call it, like the gun culture, better than me. And also social media used for recruitment. If you can see the picture, the girl, a woman in the middle, now we are seeing even the Indonesian worker who work overseas here in Singapore, Hong Kong, and other places attracted to the very narrative of ISIS because of social media. And also for coordination, a number of recruitment now, recent Indonesian who joined Marawi conflict, they use social media to coordinate. So see right away, yes, the Marawi become the theater of the conflict, but because of what happened in Syria, they cannot, many Indonesians who cannot travel to Syria, get a contact someone in the Philippines, they get the money from the Malaysian, and then they use social media to coordinate. So we need to find ways to disrupt this very movement. So this is what we do. So we need to come up with an alternative intervention, which is combining online and offline terror intervention movement to create alternative narrative. Because most of the people join to the network, in my point of view, because of the narrative also, and of course the social media. What I call it, the first program called Credible Voice. You have a credible voice, like the guy named Yusuf, who fought and denounced violence. And then now in the middle, we have an online platform so that they can channel their story and testimony and they connect. And then of course, online alone is impossible. We need to combine with offline intervention. So then we decided, okay, I know I've been to Philippines, and then Professor Rommel has been very kind to help me to arrange with a number, reform, former Abu Sayyaf group, IMF group, and I have been very fortunate to meet with your military personnel who introduced me to these people. They are genuinely disenchanted with the violence. They genuinely want to move away from either Abu Sayyaf group or MILF or other armed group in the southern Philippines. However, they do not have the skill yet to speak, to engage in an online platform. So we need to train them. So this is the thing in Indonesia too. I train them. We have a CVE workshop, communication workshop, train them how to use the media, and then we make a story. And this is what happened. You can open it. Sadly, still Indonesia, but I will be very happy to help to establish this kind of thing in the Philippines too. No, we are in the processing here in the Singapore, but for migrant workers. So first, we need the platform. So we create this platform first. And after creating, the goal of the platform here is very straightforward. First, the availability of platform that is constantly used by public reference for alternative narrative. And then second thing, this is very important, the ownership of CVE issue in public. Because most of the case in Indonesia, terrorism is still seen as the work of the West, or the work of the responsibility of the police, security apparatus, or civil society like me think, this is not my problems, let the security handle it, or this is an effort to handle, as a way to corner Islam. This is problematic. So community ownership is very critical, and this is the very aim why we need to this platform. And the third one, offline activities that that can trigger the community. So I call it my engagement called, rather than problem solution, I call it problem solutioning. And this is very important, what I call it co-active engagement. It is not only me who come up with them. So I always invite all the brilliant initiative in the hyper-local grassroots, because they know better than me. I'm a scholar, sitting in an icon here in Singapore nicely. And then at one time I need to go to Indonesia, I need to design. And then this is the community that know better. Therefore in Indonesia, I have a massive team, working with me on the ground. So the step one, it is very important. What might be working in Indonesia, I don't think that it'll be working in the Philippines. What might be working in the Philippines might not be working in Singapore. What might working in Singapore cannot be working in Malaysia. So in this case, understanding the context, because context is very important, especially in Islamic knowledge. For instance, text without context will be pretext. Most of the people, they hijack the meaning of the Quran for this very narrow, it's just text. They ignore the context. And then second thing, we need to have a targeted audience selection based on research. You cannot, because we have very limited resources. So the way I handle with this issue will be very specific, targeted, one shoot, one kill. If I want to engage the woman, so I have to know what age, what area. So you have to be very specific when you to engage, because with the more specific you are, the better for you to engage. You cannot talk to a general public and then, oh, this is what we do. No, you have to be very specific. And then we need, again, training the credible voice. We have Ustad, because without training, they have a good intention, but they don't understand the logic. So this is online, we have a running, we have a news, and then people can engage and click. And this is top of my engagement. I was speaking before the Indonesian made around 150,000 Indonesian migrant workers here in Singapore. I screen my film and engage them and share with them so that they can start story. You will be surprised. You know, all my engagement, I never use religions. And I've only used the language of security. So in this film screening, because I produced a film called Pengantin, The Bride. It's a story about 3 women looking for love in social media. And 2 of them were recruited to join ISIS, and 1 of them managed to refuse the narrative of this man, ISIS man. So my screening, I call it tips of having successful searching for love in social media. So end up many people join my group, join the workshop, because you need to coin the, you know, the language that make the people want to come. So we expect the outcome. And then when you design the community-based engagement, you know the target. We know, okay, this is what I want to do, and what expected outcome you need to have. Without understanding the expected outcome, then you will come up with what is not clear. So the target audience, we have to understand that there are radical content, so they have a critical thinking skill. And therefore, they need the promotive alternative narrative. And this is the guy in the middle here, if you can see here. This is Yusuf. This is a former narrative, former foreign fighters in Afghanistan, in the Philippines, now become peace activists. And this is the girl in the middle, is returned Indonesian female ISIS supporter. So this lady, this girl, traveled to to join ISIS for almost 2 years, and I helped him to. I helped the whole family to go back to Indonesia and start new life. And then Cisno has been very active. And then in my next film, the film is already called Seeking the Imam. No, we're going to use this kind of things. So as again, we increase the knowledge using these people to actually speak. And this is very important in all the initiative. You need to come up with monitoring and evaluations. You cannot run a program without evaluation. It's okay to make mistake in any program. And this is a part of the luxurious, because we cannot just running around do program without understanding whether your program is actually achieving something or not. Even recently now, I mean, like next week, we're going to run a kind of a festival of failure. So we're going to share all my failure of our team failures. Because when you fail, you make a mistake, we will be having a learning curve. I keep telling to my team, it is super okay for you to make mistakes. And in fact, I'm much happier to see you making mistakes rather than you don't do something. It's better for you to do something, make mistake, and reflect. And then this is the method of the collection data. We use observation, we make document review, survey, for focus group discussion, interview, and Google Analytics, because we use whether someone actually joined of us. And then this is recently now, I work closely with the Facebook, I asked their help, because I release a bunch of, I will be very happy to share and question and answer here, a bunch of keyword, a specific word that if they type in Facebook, they will redirect to our website, this community workshop, and then we can directly engage. So I hope this can help to spark the conversation that there are many ways to tackle this very issue, not only from security lens. Security will be the king, will be super important, cannot be replaced, but this is only one of many ways. Hopefully, enough for now, and then I'm more than happy to have a more engaging conversation. Thank you, Ms. Ace.
Thank you very much, Dr. Huda, for that wonderful sharing and a lot of information that we can use. Thank you for that. For those of questions, let's wait for the question and answer after the time of our next speaker. Okay. Our next speaker is a Filipino academic and international security analyst and a political science scholar. He is the chairman of the board of the Philippine Institute for Peace, Violence, and Terrorism Research, and the director of its Center for for Intelligence and National Security Studies. He finished his Bachelor's of Arts and Master of Arts in Political Science at the University of the Philippines in Diliman, Quezon City, where he took his PhD in Political Science. He earned also his PhD in International Relations at Jinan University in Guangzhou, China. He was a professor of the Political Science and International Relations at the National Defense College of the Philippines from 1998 to 2008, assistant professor of International Studies at De La Salle University, University Research Associate at the University of the Philippines in Diliman, an instructor in political science at the University of the Philippines in 1992 and 1995. He teaches at the International Studies Department of Miriam College since 2009. And in 2011, he received his Albany Peace Prize Award for Peace Education. He also received the Kahangang Filipino or Outstanding Filipino Award in 2012 for Peace and Research and National Security Education. On the occasion of the 2016 World Corporate Social Responsibility Congress in Mumbai, India, he received the award for outstanding contribution to humanitarian and social cause. He has authored several books, and among them, let me mention The Marawi Siege and its Aftermath, The Continuing Terrorist Threats, The Philippine-China Relations, The Al-Harakatul Al-Islamiyya, an essay on the Abu Sayyaf group, Terrorism in the Philippines, from Al-Qaeda to ISIS. So he wrote also the book on War on Terrorism on Southeast Asia. If you want to copy of this book, you can only contact him. You can chat to him privately here and ask for where to buy his books. No, I have all these books in my my library. No more for now. Professor is the professorial lecturer at the Department of International Studies, and let me introduce you to our guest speaker, Professor Rommel C. Banlaoi, PhD. Prof. Rommel.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much, Ace, and thank you very much to all. I'm truly glad to be back here again at the Anti-Terrorism Lecture Series. This is my 5th time to attend this. We discuss various issues from human rights, security implications, political implications, and now I will focus on community-based practices. And I'm so honored to be with Dr. Huda Ismail. Now I've been working with Dr. Huda Ismail for more than a decade. And I consider him the best counterterrorism scholar in Indonesia. Sydney Jones is an American, but she's based in Indonesia. But Dr. Huda Ismail is a true blue Indonesian who, in fact, interacted very well with most of the Bali bombers when he attended the Islamic school in Jakarta. Now, I would like to share my screen and talk about the topic at hand. So I will be focusing on the value of community-based approach in countering terrorism. And let me begin with this slide. If you know this person in slide, she is Rizky Pantasya, CC. She was arrested last Saturday because of the combined law enforcement operations of the Philippine National Police and the armed forces of the Philippines. And when I analyzed the way she was arrested, I consider her arrest as a success story of community-based approach in countering terrorism. Because without the help of the community, without the help of the public, without the help of local government who are local government officials who are working at the grassroots, then there will be no relevant information about Siski. So I consider her arrest as an excellent example of community-based approach in countering terrorism. And if you know Sisi is one of the children of the bombers, the suicide bombers. I call it the conjugal bombers of Pulo Cathedral last January 2019. And there are two other siblings who are being suspected to be suicide bombers, and I covered their faces. It's a younger sister named Amelie and a younger brother named Ahmad. And I think the arrest of Siski will yield further information about the whereabouts of these two other siblings, which I consider part of what I call family suicide terrorism, operating in the Philippines but originating in Indonesia. And were it not also for the arrest of Idam Susukan, there will be no relevant information. You know, the arrest of Susukan also yielded a lot of information about the potential suicide bombers operating in Mindanao, but not also in Mindanao, but also with a great intention to target other cities, including Metro Manila. And if you know Sisi is the wife of another suicide bomber, Andy Baso, an Indonesian, reportedly killed last August, but still the body is still not being found. And another person at large, Mundi Sawadjaan. So we hope that the arrest of Sisi will yield a lot of actionable intelligence information about the whereabouts of Mundi Sawadjaan and the two other siblings suspected to be trained and indoctrinated and even brainwashed to mount suicide bombing operations in the Philippines. But the context of our event right now is the 2002 Bali Bombing, which is a landmark, milestone event to everyone, also a milestone event in me, because right after 9/11, I just focused on international terrorism, but the 2002 Bali Bombing encouraged me to focus in Southeast Asia. And if you know this person, Umar Patek used to operate in the Philippines, and now he's detained together with his wife in Bali because of Bali Bombing. And as mentioned earlier by Dr. Huda Ismail, these personalities I present to you are all personalities associated with Jamaya Islamiyah. And you know already that Jamaya Islamiyah operated in the Philippines when JI established its Mantiki 3 in Mindanao. And Mantiki 3 is considered to be the main training ground, regional training ground of jihadist fighters in Southeast Asia. So many of the personalities associated with the Bali Bombing, in fact, were trained in the Philippines, and some of them like Dolmaten, Umar Patek, they were here in the Philippines. So the rest is history. But what I'll do now is to describe community-based approaches in counterterrorism in the Philippines 18 years after the 2002 Bali Bombing. And what have we learned 18 years after 2002 Bali Bombing? So what I'm going to present to you is to discuss first principles of community-based approach in counterterrorism and the importance of applying community-based approach in counterterrorism. Then I will also present to you Philippine practices in community-based counterterrorism measures, and I will focus more attention analyzing issues and challenges in implementing community-based approaches in counterterrorism in the Philippines, and will conclude with some recommendations and for considerations of our law enforcement authorities. So what are the principles of community-based approach in counterterrorism? These are the principles. Vulnerable and conflict-affected communities provide terrorist groups safe haven and operational areas to wreak havoc. Support network from disgruntled communities, both virtual and actual, gives terrorist groups the needed oxygen in order to survive and persist and therefore mount violence elsewhere. Community support and ownership, therefore, is very essential in countering terrorism and even in the prevention of the spread of violent extremism. And for me, community involvement in counterterrorism can effectively deny terrorist groups the fertile ground to establish a home base, a safe haven, and an operational area. You know the reason why foreign terrorist fighters come to the Philippines? Because there are communities willing to cuddle them. There are disgruntled members of the communities willing to provide them safe haven, willing to provide them home base, and they consider Mindanao as an effective operational area because of the existing grievances of those people, you know, in the communities who are disgruntled and who are feeling many dissatisfactions about the situation, the feeling of injustices and discrimination, and many of the conducive conditions, in fact, mentioned in the Anti-Terrorism Law of 2020. And if you know, of course, you know already Mao Zedong. Mao Zedong once said that guerrilla must move amongst the people as a fish swims in the sea. So for those military officers and even police officers involved in counterinsurgency, you're very familiar with this dictum of Mao Zedong about the need to really immerse yourself with the community in order to win the revolution. And we need also the community to counter this kind of armed rebellion in the Philippines. And according to Mao Zedong, you know, you need to win the hearts and minds of the community to win the revolution by encircling, you know, the center from the countryside. So you have to organize communities from the countryside, and therefore counterinsurgency strategy aims to drain the sea in order to separate guerrillas from support base in the population. And for a long, long time, you know, the military, the armed forces of the Philippines and the Philippine National Police have been oriented towards this kind of counterinsurgency strategy by winning the hearts and minds of the people. But, you know, this is my new thinking right now. Yeah, it is very important that law enforcement authorities must cooperate with the people to protect communities from bad guys. Okay? But rather than draining the sea to separate threat groups from support base in the population, my recommendation based on my study of community-based approaches is that law enforcement authorities should clean up the sea from the pollutants of threat groups. So rather than draining the sea, you just have to clean up the sea from the pollutants of threat groups. And how can we clean up the sea? And that will be the focus of my discussion today. So I will discuss Philippine practices in community-based counterterrorism measures, and based on my study of existing Philippine practices, there's no need to reinvent the wheel. In fact, we have existing practices that we need to sustain and we need to develop further because threats are also evolving. So I will focus on the efforts made by the police. And you know, the Philippine National Police already have this community-oriented policing system, CAPS. And I consider this a very excellent practice of the Philippine National Police, applying the concept of community policing in order to address crimes and violence in the community. But this community-oriented policing system is now transformed into a community and service-oriented policing system. And if you will look at the framework and implementing guidelines of the community and service-oriented policing system, and you can find this framework in and implementing guidelines in the publications released by the National Police Commission, you will see that many principles of community-based practices are in fact already embedded in the existing documents of the Philippine National Police. And I consider them as really impressive. And this is the framework of the CISOP triumvirate of the Philippine National Police. And crucial to this framework is the need to deliver basic services to the people. And I think that is very, very crucial. And the Philippine National Police will in fact focus more on enforcing law, but the greater responsibility will fall under the local chief executive to deliver the services to the communities. And without the effective delivery of basic services to the community, you will make the community prone to recruitment of any terrorist groups or any groups adhering to the use of violence. So this is an excellent framework from the Philippine National Police. And the Philippine National Police also have this manual, the Police Community Relations Manual. Okay, that if you will read the Police Community Relations Manual, there are a lot of great principles there that apply the philosophies of community-based approaches in addressing not only criminalities, but also terrorist threats. And here, I would like to present to you the efforts of the Philippine National Police to transform itself so that it can be a better police force by 2030. They have this PNP Patrol Plan 2030. And as a former member of the Advisory Council of the Criminal Investigation and Detection Group, I participated in the formulation of this patrol plan. And right now, I continuously sit in the Advisory Council of the Drug Enforcement Group of the Philippine National Police. And I consider this as a very excellent patrol plan because of its mission. Its mission is that the mission is to enforce the law, prevent and control crimes, maintain peace and order, and ensure public safety and internal security with the active support of the community. And if you will look at the framework of the PNP Patrol Plan 2030, the community plays a vital role on top of the framework, plays a vital role in maintaining peace and order in the Philippines. And this maintenance of peace and order includes countering terrorism and countering violent extremism. So this is the excellent practice of the Philippine National Police found in their various documents that I analyzed. Now, what about the military? I went to the Armed Forces of the Philippines in order to prepare for this webinar and searched the existing literature there. And I found also that even the Philippine military has very impressive civil military operations framework in order to apply community-based practices in counterinsurgency, in counterterrorism, and countering violent extremism. And if you will look at the pillars of CMO, they call it civil military operations, you know, public affairs, civil affairs, and psychological operations are integral part of this CMO. If you will look further to the documents of the Philippine National Police, there is even a school, you know, a school training military personnel to conduct civil military operations in order to develop a breed of what they call warrior diplomats. And you know what, this is what we need, you know, warrior diplomats. You know, they will not carry arms to win the hearts and minds of the people, but they will carry with them the skill in diplomacy, the skill in community work, the skill in community organizing in order to win the hearts and minds of the people against threat groups. And this is one excellent example of efforts of the Armed Forces of the Philippines to promote the principle of community-based approaches. Okay, and this is being taught in the Civil Military Operations School of the Armed Forces of the Philippines. And you know, I also had the privilege of reading this manual of the Philippine Army, the Philippine Army Civil Military Operation Manual. And although there are a lot of issues to be revised there, but still the main principle of community-based approaches can be found in the existing manual of the Philippine Army, which is being applied for civil military operations. And in my work as an academic, I have participated in various efforts of the Philippine Army in its civil military operations work in the conflict-affected areas. And although there are rooms for improvement, but still the principle is being upheld by the Armed Forces of the Philippines. And even the existing operation campaign plan of the Armed Forces of the Philippines, the Uplan Kapayapaan, and before the Uplan Bayanihan, you know, community, the role of the community, the role of whole society approach, the role of community ownership in counterterrorism, counterinsurgency is in fact being articulated in these campaign plans. Before, during the time of President Noynoy Aquino, it was called Uplan Bayanihan. Now it's called Uplan Kapayapaan. And in the course of my research, you know, I discovered also that even the communist movement has this counterpart of Uplan Bayanihan. You know, they portray it a different way. So right now, you know, threat groups and government security sectors are competing for community support to advance all their causes. That's why it's very important that the police and the military should also harness their skill in community-based approaches, because the enemy of the state is also utilizing community-based approaches in order to advance their political agenda. And we shall not allow existing threat groups to outsmart us in this area. So we need to outsmart them in order to win this war against them. No, even in the national security policy of our government, made by the National Security Council in coordination with the national intelligence coordinating agencies and other concerned agencies of the national government, they formulated this national security policy plan for 2017-2022. And if you will read this national security policy, you will find there the need to apply community-based approaches in countering terrorism and countering insurgency also. And there's also a concomitant national security strategy with this policy, but the national security strategy is not being made public yet by our government. But I think it's high time for our government to really make this strategy public, so that the community, the public, and especially us, the academy will own this national security strategy being advanced by our national government. Because with community ownership, the Philippine government will not do wrong. Okay. And I also examined the Philippine Development Plan 2017-2022. This is the first medium-term development plan to be anchored on the national term vision of the government. It's called Vision Natin 2040, which is a longer term vision. And if you will read the Philippine Development Plan, particularly chapters on peace and development, you will see that building empowered and resilient communities are essential for national development. And national development is also very important to address existing security threats in the Philippines. So if you will look at all documents of the national government, we can see a lot of principles embedded in many government documents. That's why we are not lacking. And very recently also, we have this national action plan on preventing and countering violent extremism that I discussed during our 4th Anti-Terrorism Lecture Series. There is also strong emphasis on the need for community-based approaches. And by the way, plugging, the Department of Interior and Local Government has also invited me to speak in their webinar on October 17. And I will talk about security sector reform in countering terrorism. And part of the security sector reform is the involvement of the community in countering terrorism. Now, what are the issues and challenges, and as well as recommendations in implementing community-based approaches in countering terrorism in the Philippines, now that we have discussed to you existing policy, strategies, and documents of the Armed Forces of the Philippines and the Philippine National Police? And these are my take on the issue. These are my observations. Existing policies and strategies are all very good in papers. Very excellent. As an academic, as a scholar, as a professor, I find all these documents and papers very excellent. So if I were to give them a mark, I will give them a highest mark. But this is my lament, that there's a need to do better in implementation. We have very good policies. We have excellent strategies. We have very impressive manuals, but there's a need to do better in implementation. If we can only implement those good policies and strategies, I think we can never do wrong. Another observation is that our police and also military personnel trained in community-based approaches, but there's still a need to develop more civilian community organizers supporting government efforts at the grassroots level. This is what we are lacking in the community-based organizers. There are more community organizers working for the threat groups and their front organizations, rather than community organizers working and supporting the government. I think we need to develop a wider communities of community organizers who will work at the grassroots level. So we need that. Next is civilian volunteers doing social work in conflict-affected areas have more empathies with threat groups. And this is my observation. I have talked to a lot of social workers and civilian volunteers working at the community levels, particularly conflict-affected areas in Mindanao and also elsewhere in the countries in Luzon and Visayas. But you know, they are more sympathetic with threat groups, more sympathetic with NPA, more sympathetic with Abu Sayyaf group, you know, and that's also one of the reasons why the Abu Sayyaf group continues to persist and continues to be resilient, because there are communities supporting them. So my recommendation is that there's a need to build a bigger network of social workers sympathetic to government security forces. You know, we need social workers because social workers, they know what to do with the communities. They are trained to do things in the communities. Okay, but we need to recruit them to work on our side, because you know threat groups are recruiting them to their side. Like for example, in the University of the Philippines, there is a school there on social work and community development. But they said that it is in fact that school is for socialist work and communist development. Why? Because that they are producing more and more social workers who are against the government. We need to develop a battery of social workers more sympathetic to the government cause. Next, it has local government authorities are in fact closer to the grassroots. Yeah, because they are at the forefront of the delivery of social services to the people. Yet, local government authorities remain to be distant to vulnerable communities. They are closer to the grassroots, yet distant to vulnerable communities. So there's a need for local government authorities to build capacities to perform and deliver at the most affected and violent-prone communities in the Philippines. So that's a challenge to the local government. Now, if you will look at the success stories in applying community-based counter-terrorism approaches, we can see a lot of success stories. We have success stories in Basilan, in Bohol, in Tawi-Tawi, in Maguindanao, in Sultan Kudarat, and elsewhere. But the main problem is that sustaining the gains of these exemplary experiences is in fact a perennial issue. For me, there's a need to pass on exemplary practices to the next leadership for continuous innovation. And this is my observation. Every 3 years, sometimes we change the approach. You know, if the local government authorities cannot sustain it for 9 years to lead the communities, you know, succeeding leaders will just change everything. We should, in fact, stop that kind of habit of stopping the efforts made by predecessors. We need to pass on exemplary practices to the next leadership for continuous innovation. And I think with that note, I have made the presentation already. Let me end my presentation today with this thought by Anthony J.D. Angelo, who is an American social worker, and American scholar. Without a sense of caring, there can be no sense of community. And I think that is what threat groups are using. They are presenting themselves as caring to the community. And I think government security forces must also embrace this narrative that they care, okay, and they matter to the government. With that note, thank you very much for your attention. Now I'm ready to participate in the open forum. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Banlaoi. It's always a pleasure to hear you, and also Dr. Huda. Do we have anyone who about to raise his hands for the first question? Anyone who have the rejoinder, comments, or suggestion before we read those in the chat box? Do we see any raised hands to ask the questions to give the speakers?
Ace.
Yes, sir.
I'm just going to read what I've written on the chat box.
Yes, sir.
And I said there that this is, by the way, this is Hermie Colina. Social workers seem to be sympathetic to insurgents than government security forces, not because they believe in the ideology, but simply because they are concerned and afraid of their safety once they're left behind in the communities with no security forces support. In the same vein, communities are the same. If there are no stay-behind forces to sustain the gains, insurgents will just come back and take the communities back again. That has been the problem ever since. And I think this is directed to Professor Rommel and also to Dr. Nuda.
Shall I comment, Ace?
Yes, please.
Okay, this is the existing practice in the armed forces of the Philippines, and I think most of you are familiar with this practice. You know, the concept of clear, hold, consolidate, develop. You know, in counterinsurgency, there must be equal efforts in clearing, in holding, in consolidating, and development. But existing practice is that the military or the police will clear, they will hold, but they will leave all the efforts to the local government, the consolidation and development. I think what is needed is for security forces to be present in all these aspects of operations, particularly in the development and in consolidation. Like, for example, in my experience analyzing the situation in Bohol, in the past, you know, Bohol was already cleared, okay? But now there are recovery efforts by communist movement because the efforts to develop, okay, and sustain the efforts of the past governments did not happen. So I think there's a need to sustain the efforts. And when it comes to the idea of clear, hold, consolidate, develop, I think security forces must always be present. They should not, they shall not leave the communities. Like, for example, the 1st Marine Brigade in Basilan. You know, I used to collaborate with them, the 1st Marine Brigade in Basilan. When they left the 1st Marine Brigade, you know, other threat groups proliferated again. So if security forces will leave the area, they should leave behind equally competent forces that will sustain the peace. Otherwise, it will be undermined by threat groups. Thank you.
Yeah, I think my comment on this will be very critical for us also to look at the impact of the conflict, even after, especially after the conflict. Especially because here you said about the, you know, the social worker sympathize, or I mean a community worker sympathize to the group rather than to the government because of the security issue. I think it's very legitimate concern. And this is also has been happening, you know, like similarly in Indonesia too. Because what we need, what I call, because it's a peace builder, as an activist on the ground, there are two types of peace: negative peace and positive peace. Negative peace, like there is no conflict, but there is something still going on the ground, preparing for the next future conflict. It means there are so many underlying social and material issues that we haven't really resolved. That it's just a question of time, it will erupt. We are fortunate enough not to have a kind of a completely so much problematic issues like in the south of Philippines. Like I said, we do have also cases in a post-conflict area, like two areas, Poso and Ambon. And up to this day, those who involved in that conflict area still play significant role in the radicalizations in the country too. So what I'm trying to say here, it is very important to engage not only, you know, from the government side, from the civil worker side, but as I said, I keep emphasizing the need to engage farmers, those who used to involve and, you know, challenge the narrative of their group. Because I will consider, again, to go back to my argument, the need to have credible voice. The reason why sometimes community do not trust the government, I think because of, you cannot avoid, you know, the previous resentment toward the government, the way they handle the very issue on the ground, you know, the atrocities that has been created by the government. So sometimes it create, you know, like anger within the community. But imagine for someone who used to get involved, because I met a number of your former, you know, member of either Abu Sayyaf or MILF, who genuinely want to be part of the solution. And then I think engaging these people is super critical.
Thank you very much, professors. There's another question that I'd like to read. This is for Dr. Banlaoi. How and where can we start academic institutions coordinating and cooperating with the armed forces of the Philippines? Now it seems they are antagonistic to each other, if I am not mistaken. This is from Andy Torato of Avoid This Group.
Yeah, thanks. In fact, that's the old school that, the academe does not support the government. In fact, right now in the 21st century, there's now a growing recognition that the academe plays a vital role in policy formulation and even contributing to improvement of existing operations of the security forces. And that's now changing. That's now changing. Right now, I'm used to be blacklisted by the PNP and the AFP because of my connection with the University of the Philippines, known to be producing radicals. But now we are being engaged. The Philippine National Police has existing advisory councils where they invite civilian community leaders and academics like me in the board. The advisory council of the police also has counterparts in the armed forces of the Philippines. So it's now changing, but it's not totally changed. But right now we are seeing that the police and the military are more and more accommodative of the important role of the academics. Just last week, I was invited by the civil military operations group of the Philippine Air Force to talk about the South China Sea. And right now, I continue to work with the civil military operations officials of the army. The only problem is that it's personality based rather than institutions based mostly. If your friends in the armed forces will be reassigned to another areas, then you will lose your contact already. So you have to build more contacts. I think to have a better relationship between security forces and the academe, it must be institutionalized rather than personality based. That's the problem. I'm being invited because I know someone in the Philippine National Police or our friends in the military. Okay? But if it's not institutionalized, then cooperation will be like a castle built on sand. So we need to strengthen the foundation of this cooperation by institutionalizing security forces and academic relationship. Okay? And there are still a lot of things to do towards that effort. But in my case, I continuously present myself, offer myself gratis to the institutions just to to share my existing knowledge, Kaya that's the problem with the security force desk. They also want things gratis. But I just ask my donors to increase my support so that I can do more work with the security forces. But that's the reality that we need to face. But I think that reality will soon change. Why? Because right now I am meeting a lot of young military officers who are who have broader in perspective and who have a better understanding of the existing situation that we find ourselves. And for me, that's a good prospect. And I know there are some people of you listening to me, and they know, before the Philippine National Police will, particularly the intelligence sector, will always tag me as from UP, possibility one of the fronts of the communist movement. But now they are engaging me, So I think we need to overcome this kind of mentality. We have to overcome this Cold War mentality and learn more innovative things. Okay? That's the good thing about threat groups. They are quick to innovate, and I think security forces should also be quick in innovation.
Okay.
So it's all smart then. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rommel. I think Dr. Noor Huda can also have a parallel experience, because most likely your experience, Dr. Rommel, has been experienced also in Indonesia. What can you say, Dr. Noor?
On what? Especially on what? Working closely with the government or what?
Yeah, something like that. Now, when social groups are supposed to work with the government, but just like you in the case of the Philippines, they are against each other because they look at each other as influence.
Yeah. I think Dr. Rommel already shared. In the line of our work, oftentimes it's not about IQ, it's about AQ, emotional quotient. How can we build trust among among members of how can we build trust among stakeholders who come up with a different approach, different worldview. So this is always our challenge. In the beginning, it was very difficult for my government to actually trust my work because I can understand that, because I used to be part of the network myself. There's always, how could I trust this guy? Whether this guy is actually reform or whether this is pretending or whether this is part of the extension of the group, like Dr. Roman mentioned about what Mao said. Maybe I'm hiding, in this community, so trying to be part of it takes times. But therefore, the best way for me is coming from the security, show, don't tell. I want to show the result. So you have to understand the limitation of your work. I always keep saying to my team, when we want to make change in the community, there are 4 things that we need to know. First, you have to, what is your position? If you are an architect, if you have an idea, this is what we call ourselves an architect. And second thing, we need to have a sharpness, someone who sharp our ideas. We want to do this is security forces can play a very important role. Oh, yes, I think your idea group, but how about to do this? Or maybe this is the work of the academician. Academician also come up with so many good ideas. But you need to have an idea. And then second thing, what I call it enabler. In the end of the day, like it or not, we government do not have enough resources. We need to work with so many different stakeholders, including private sector and donors, for example. And the last one, what I call it linchpins, someone actually working on the ground, on the field to implement what we want. As Dr. Rommel, Prof. Rommel already mentioned, you have many good ideas, but in the end of the day, you have to roll your sleeve, make your boot dirty to actually do something and embrace the possibility of making mistakes. And that's what I'm trying to do. I mean, yes, it's a very obvious that sometimes I fully understand now why governments sometimes a bit difficult to trust civil society like us or scholar like us, because the very nature of the sensitivity of the work. So therefore, I always limit myself. Okay, what I'm good at. I'm a storyteller. I'm good in story. I'm a creative person. So I just limit my work on this very skill that my government, that is not the strength of my government. So this is always, I always work on my strength rather than try to, challenge or imitate what my government has been doing, So yeah, this is my take on my approach.
Okay, thank you very much. There's a question also from John Sagalang. No? I don't know if John will read that or it has been answered in the chat box by Professor Banlaoi. But can you see that, Dr. Huda, if you can see the question? The question is, we oftentimes talk about community-based approaches in addressing domestic or even international conflicts. However, there seems to be always a conflicting, or should I say, chicken and egg enigma surrounding security vis-a-vis the development against poverty. There seems there is always difficulty putting balance on both to maximize community participation. If given the chance to lead and implement, which element do you think should you prioritize?
This is very tricky question. So this guy apparently is going to hire me as a consultant for his project. So I think here, I mean, if I want to run a project, this again, you have to understand your limitation. So therefore, for me, when I design a project, I have been designing this for many years, you have to be realistic. The more specific, the better. And then you don't have to change the whole big things, but you have to be very strategic. Make it small. This is always my approach. When okay, maybe it's not fair to say which one is security approach first or community-based approach. I have to say I am from the community, and I always believe that security issues emerge from community, and in individual or group that involve in the community should be bring back to community. So I was designing this in a community approach. If I'm given a chance to run from this intervention, so I will prefer to be focusing on a community approach. with a super specific target and then measurable one. Because any program must come up three things. First, must be very simple, and then duplicable, and then this is the last one, self-sustained. When I run a project here called Food for Peace, I'm running a cafe in chain of network of cafe. People saying, wow, Huda, you are now a graduate from St. Andrews, but now running a cafe. They don't understand the idea behind running the cafe. Or why you run this website now, you're earning the PhD. They don't understand the bigger picture yet of having this community website. It's a tool. It is not the goal. It's a tool for me because I'm always a person who believes the power of a social network. So network approach is always my approach, if you might ask me, network approach. Even you coming from security forces, if you have this angling of network approach, then you realize that security approach alone is not enough. You need to work with so many network. So I think the best way will be creating hub or community networking approach. Do I make myself clear or I'm talking too much?
Yes, very good. Very good. What about you, Doc Rommel?
Yeah, I've been reading the chat box and I've been addressing them. So let me address them one by one. Now, regarding the issue of security and development, that we need security first before development, you know, that's a linear approach. We should go beyond the linear approach. The reality now is no longer viewed in a linear sense. We should view security and development as two sides of the same coin. In the Philippine Medium-Term Development Plan, that kind of linear approach has already been challenged. We are now applying what we call the simultaneous approach, that we pursue development while pursuing security at the same time. It's not chicken and egg, you know, we have to do it simultaneously because security and development are two sides of the same coin. So if you focus on security first and you forget the development, it will not work. So we need to do it simultaneously because they have what I call the dynamic interactions with each other. So in the academy, we call it that we have to be more holistic and comprehensive in your perspective. And security and development are part of this comprehensive gamut of issues that we need to face. Then second, there's a very important question about the arrest of CC, the Indonesian bomber. Suspected bomber and the relevance of this. As I said earlier, her arrest was in fact a product of a successful community-based approach. Without the support of the community providing information, without the support of local government facilitating the support of this community to work with security forces, we cannot do it. That's why in counterterrorism, we always see people doing military, making bombs or doing groundwork. But we have to pay attention also to operatives on the ground doing a lot of civil military operations because they are the one working with the communities. And without this great work of the CMOs working on the ground, we will not be able to get information that became vital for the arrest of CC. So we need to sustain this kind of efforts. Now there is a question whether we will deport CC to Indonesia. If there's the request of the Indonesian government, I think there are technicalities involved, you know, and legalities involved. But for me, we need to keep CC first. We need to get information from CC first because if we will deport CC again to Indonesia, Indonesia will get the information and we have to get the information first. I think eventually we can deport CC, but we need to keep her first. We lost a lot of information because we keep on deporting people. If you deport people, we lose them. We have to maintain them. And talk with them and get the necessary information that we need before allowing them to leave the country. So what are other questions?
I think there's also a question for Dr. Huda. I think is from the PNP, Josephine Hinko. Are you going to ask this question or I'll read it? There's a question for you.
Oh, Yusuf, I'm Yusuf, right?
Yeah, there's a question. I want to ask Dr. Huda, what is the name of Yusuf? Yeah.
I already talked to him privately, and then okay, if he needs me to share all information about my existing client who used to be part of a
Yeah.
Singapore instance, I will be very happy to share with. Because to me, as again, Dr. Rommel has mentioned, talking to these people as a way for us to understand. Because understanding doesn't mean supporting. You know, I think different ways of asking questions between academic, civil society like me, and security is very different. There are similarities, but also different. For instance, people like us, especially me, we are obsessed with the process. We want to know what make you the process. But for security, at least in Indonesian context, they want to know directly the network. So if they want to charge this person, okay, if I'm going to interview this guy, under which law I can charge this guy. So this is they're obsessed with the technicality. Unlike people like me, when I arrest someone, like I have like okay, when this guy what can we get? Of course, when can we understand? Can he or she be disengaged or de-radicalized and eventually became agent of peace in their own community? Because I always strongly believe that, you know, identity is super, you know, identity is a dynamic, identity is not fixed, you know. It depends on so many interactions. And there are many ample stories, not only within the terrorism, but, you know, criminality and then all of this, even in religious conversion. It's always like that, you know. But that is always the psyche for me, because people like us as a scholar or people working on the ground, we are trained to think as a marathon. It's not sprinter, you know, like a, no, okay, rest, understand the network and done. We are thinking, okay, very long, you know, what can we do? How can we work with people like them to prevent others not to be like them, you know? Because curative justice is very critical in this approach.
Okay. Thank you very much. There's another question. I think there's another question that I saw here. Have you seen that, Dr. Huda, about, I
Yeah,
think it's
but Indonesian one, right? I think for this kind of topic, because it's recorded, you know, like I asked him to contact me directly because he asked a bit sensitive. What is the level of effectiveness of the de-radicalization by my government? You know, there are some effective, but there are also some, you know, less effective one. You know? But I have to be fair, you know, like this is a fascinating fact that, especially about recidivism, we are obsessed to know to what you call it, to gauge or to measure the level of success in terms of recidivism. You know, because there are many cases of recidivists, right? Those who arrested and then inside the prison and then get back again. People tend to make it so big in the media, in the analysis, but the government tend to downplay, oh, it's very small. But the problem, in fact, if we want to assess fairly, what we have a problem is only 10% of cases of recidivism. And that, however, that 10% might create another problem, a bigger problem. This is the case in suicide bomber in Holo. You know, they are also, this is these guys, the couple, they're deportees. The issue of Indonesian who wanted to travel to Syria but caught in the border and then deported by the Indonesian government during what they say call it rehabilitation. They behave nicely. You can't, because ideology you cannot see, right? Behave nicely, send back to community, and instead of community embrace them, their whole community embrace them and using social media. Then they managed to go back to, they managed to find ways to go to southern Philippines. Because they don't have a skill, they end up become the cannon fodder, become the suicide bombers. And you see, to talk about this terrorism, you need to see, you have to include the nexus of not only security forces, but first the nexus of our immigration problem, the nexus of migration problem, the nexus of with migrant worker problem. Because in Sabah, there are many Indonesians who work legally in Sabah, but they facilitate these people to actually travel with existing porous border in between Indonesia and Manado to, you know, and to southern Philippines. So yeah, as complex. It's complex, but also complicated. If it's complicated, it's hard to solve. But complex, we can we slowly, explain one by one what are the existing connections.
Oh, okay. Thank you,
And
Dr.
then
Huda.
have a 30 minutes to go or what?
Yes. Okay. I would like to also recognize the presence of Ma'am Teresita Angsi. She is with the Philippine Association for Chinese Studies. The association and then the Filipino group of, let's say, Filipino Chinese or the Chinoys, the community has been a part of fighting terrorism also in the Philippines. She has a comment on the slow rehab of Marawi. Would you like to express more, ma'am, if you're online? If you can have an audio, you might like to hear from more of your comments and inputs. Ma'am Tessie? Ma'am Tessie. Okay, while she's handling his audio, I'd just like to recognize her presence, and she commented already in the chat box. Okay. Do we have other questions, additional questions aside from those in the chat box? Because most of the questions in the chat box were addressed already by Professor Banlaoi and have been discussed also by Dr. Huda. There's one question here from Ali Wibisono. Mr. Ali, do you want me to read this for you? How does community-based practices differ from traditional approaches in curbing terrorist financing?
Wow. I think Prof. Rommel will be the best because Ali is a scholar too.
Oh, okay. Ali, do you have additional questions?
Thank you for the opportunity, sir. Yes, I'm concerned at the moment with the issue of terrorism financing because we've been discussing the impact of COVID-19 pandemic to terrorist operations and the burgeoning yet temporary conclusion seems to be that while terrorist actions or violent attacks might have been minimized by the pandemic, propaganda, financing, and recruitment seem to be going on despite the pandemic and through online and offline sources. And so they're particularly getting better at raising funds to support the family of perpetrators. In my language, it seems to be that terrorist networks are capable of implementing human security much better than the government. The government is sabotaged in in providing human security, and I've talked to bilateral cooperation director from the BNPT, and he said that the part of the problem is that people don't understand who the terrorists really are. So they're easily persuaded by charismatic clerics who need support, who raise funds, and they easily give money to them. But I'm way forward. I mean, yeah, well, it's part of the problem too. I mean, the government has no clear designation who the terrorists are. So who participated in terrorist actions, they are motivated by beliefs rather than So yeah, naivet is there. But I'm just thinking, is there any hope that we can somehow have better monitoring, control, and mitigation of terrorist financing? Because the amounts that is raised by fundraising is not a lot. So it's very difficult for the government to monitor the transactions. Since this is a community-based practice kind of seminar, I'm hoping we can have alternative visions about this. Thank you very much. Sorry, I'm taking too long.
Thank you, Ali. Any interactions from our speakers?
Prof.
Okay.
Rommel, go ahead.
Yeah, is Ali the one who asked question about counter-terrorism financing and the involvement of the community?
Yes.
You know, the reason why terrorism financing is working on the ground, because the community is benefiting from it. You know, this is my observation about the financing of Marawi City Siege. Aside from financing coming from drugs, it also got financing from IC Central, and they use the community to finance the operations in Marawi. They applied what they call the Hawala system, where communities, you know, large members of the communities are involved in receiving money from outside, and somebody also from the community serving as a leader, collecting this from different members of the community until the money becomes big. You know, you send like $100 to a single person, the Anti-Money Laundering Council will not notice it. But if the whole community is involved, getting 10% of the total delivery, then the whole community facilitates the financing of terrorism. And the only way to stop that kind of financing of terrorism is to also involve the communities against it. And we have documented that in our book, in Marawi Siege and its aftermath, the continuing terrorist threats, where we devoted a chapter on counterterrorism financing. And one way of countering financing terrorism is also to involve the community in countering terrorism. The community is willing to be used as conduit of funds because they receive cuts from the delivery of funds. Like, for example, I'm a poor Muslim individual in a conflict-affected community in Mindanao. If I receive $100, getting 10% of that using my own money transfer method, like the ordinary money transfer, for me, it's a good deal. You know, for 5,000 pesos, I will receive $500 just to use my name to receive it. It's a good deal. If you use many communities, and there are a lot of communities involved in receiving money, also using overseas Filipino contract workers. This is an excellent example of we interviewed, you know, overseas Filipino contract workers. I interviewed one Filipino overseas contract worker. He said, I decided to deliver this money to my son, but this as a donation, a zakat from a good friend from Saudi. He received like $500 as zakat, and then deliver this money to your friend, but ask your friend to your brother, but ask your brother to deliver the other parts of the money to this individual that they don't know. And the modus operandi is being done that way, but without the knowledge of that OFW, without the knowledge of the recipient in Mindanao, that their transactions are already being used to to finance terrorism operations in the Philippines. And I think that is the thing that we need to pay attention to involve the communities in countering the financing of terrorism, because without the support of the communities, financing will continue to flow. And I have seen arrests of some personalities, Abu Sayyaf group personalities, telling us stories that they use, you know, several ATM cards being used to transfer money. Okay? And they have a way to do that, and the communities is being involved. Even in Mindanao, why is it that, you know, kidnapping activities of Abu Sayyaf group continues in Mindanao? Why? Because, you know, it has become a community enterprise. You know, the kidnapping has become a community economic activities. The whole community is involved. The community becomes the spotter. The community becomes the source of information. The community becomes an early warning information. The community is involved. So we need to involve the community in all aspects of counterterrorism operations, whether in the area of financing, whether in the area of recruitment or whether in the area of actual operations. We need the community. Without community support, we cannot win this war against threat groups. And because you mentioned Ma'am Teresita Angsi earlier, because she cannot talk now because of the technicalities, but I examine her work in kidnapping activities. You know, in the past, in the early 90s, the Filipino-Chinese communities became targets of kidnapping activities, you know, because they are using them as milking cows for a lot of economic activities. But Ma'am Teresita Angsi mobilized the Filipino-Chinese community against kidnapping. The whole community became involved. The whole Binondo became involved. And that facilitated police work. Now, you know, the industry was stopped, but there's still some small kidnapping activities, but the whole scheme was destroyed because the community got involved and the community facilitated the police work. So that's an excellent example on how the community can facilitate law enforcement operations. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof.
Thank you, Prof. Any other questions, comments from the audience? We still have 6 minutes to go, and we can officially end after 6 minutes. We can reach 12 o'clock. Usually we exceed the noon time, and that's okay. Any more questions and comments from the members or the attendees here now?
I just want to add a bit regarding terrorism finance. I'm not an expert, but I think I want to add a bit to Mr. Ali's questions. At the moment, together with my team, I've been working a lot in the community rehabilitation, social integration program, where my team help release terrorists to actually integrate back society in the level of a hyper local community. In Indonesia, we call it RT/RW, so that they can go back. So one is interesting findings that we found is that number of terrorists who are still incarcerated inside the prison, they refuse to take part of de-radicalization program run either by government or by civil society because they're afraid of losing the financial support from ISIS supporter in Indonesia. The number alone is very small, 500, but every month and targeted and specific things. So I think you're right. If we want to actually disrupt the network, you have to follow the money. And you're also right, they always find very, delicate ways to continue channel their support, not only directly financial support, but also social support. Let's say in Poso, for examples, they said to the community, to the convicted terrorists inside the prison, said, okay, I might not give you directly money, but why don't you send your kid to study in my boarding school for free? So that kind of thing is just to give them still in the network in the sense of social support. And as again, because the distinction between when we talk about terrorism, we are almost obsessed with the drama of terrorism, with the explosion, with the attack. But we tend to ignore the process of producing that drama, which is including terrorism finance, for instance, education, for instance, the creation of propaganda, for instance. And we always think that people who join terrorists, they are driven by lunatic and negative approach. Oftentimes, to my surprise, those people they are driven to the network, they are allured to the network, driven by positive values, let's say redemption, the need to help the oppressed. And we need to substitute this one, the substitute of feeling importance for them. So as again, we need to come up with a micro level of engagement linked into meso, the organizational level, but also macro one, which is the understanding the constellation of existing international politics. Without that, because yes, they are local, but their imagination is beyond national state, I think Professor Ali is the best. You know better the subject, man.
Terima kasih Mas Huda. Terima kasih. Thank you, Mas.
Thank you very much for that additional comments and inputs, Dr. Huda.
Yes.
So probably as we proceed to our the end of the program, I would like to ask each of our speakers their final thoughts and final closing remarks on this topic, especially that we are now might be facing another challenges in the terrorism aspect. Wants to go first, Dr. Huda, please.
Okay, first of all, of course, thank you for having me in these very important conversations. But to end of this remark is four. Number one, what I call it, the concept that we always use is first. Number one is called BE, banality of evil. Those people are the evil, the act of evil are banal. And number one, PR, process and relation. They get involved in this because of process and lastly because of the social relations. And the last one, therefore, to counter them, we need to come up with a three approach, with the three H approach. You have to win their heart. The second thing, give them skill, hand, and the last one, you challenge ideology. And last one, once they manage to achieve this level, we have to train them to challenge the very network that they used to belong because they are the credible voice. And we as an outsider, as civil society, we have to help them, train them to find their own calling, to start new life, because recidivism, going back to the violence, will not only harm them as individual, but the whole society at large.
Thank you, Dr. Huda. Now, thank you also for coming and joining us. We're so excited that you have been attending the ATLS before, and that is really for through the efforts of Professor Banlaoi. Now, let's hear from Professor Rommel, please.
Yes, I would like to stress my concluding remarks by paying attention to the three-tiered approach of our government in countering terrorism. These three-tiered approaches are first, intelligence gathering, second, target hardening, and third, consequence management. And my argument is that we cannot have successful intelligence gathering, we cannot have successful target hardening, and we cannot have successful consequence management without the support of the community. So community-based approach is essential in applying all this three-tiered approach in combating terrorism in the Philippines. Thank you.
So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Huda and Dr. Banlaoi for gracing this occasion. And we have already ideas for our next ATLS because Professor Rommel Banlaoi is always thinking about the next topic ahead, no? A month before and even months before. We are already looking at ways to keep you informed about terrorism, countering them and preventing the extreme violence. So to everyone who attended, thank you very much for staying until now. We saw that nobody left except they are disconnected by their internet. We thank you again for your presence, for the answers. I know that there will be more questions. And for those who ask questions privately to our resource speakers, kindly contact them individually. Probably while you're still chatting and you are still online, you can exchange your email addresses so that there will be private consultations and you can get them and hire them as your consultants. They are very competent into that. Thank you also for the contribution of those who ask questions and for Professor Ali for your inputs also. So to everyone, we'd like to thank you and we hope to see your attendance again in our session 6. Thank you very much, everyone. And to our host and sponsor, Securitymatters, Philippines, ACE and Associates, Resilient Philippines, Arslan, SRS Philippines, and of course, to the PIP VTR, which has been always a supporter and a prominent organization in the Philippines against terrorism, violence, and violence. Thank you very much for everyone. You can now unmute and say goodbye to our our guest
Thank you.
speakers. Thank
Thank
you.
you, sir. Thank you,
Thank you,
sir.
Prof. Rommel.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
sir.
Thank you, Josie.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sir, thank you.
Yes,
Thank you,
Prof.
friends.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
Yes, sir. Thank you po.
Oh, in and out ka kanina.
Internet connection.
Yeah, I saw a lot of people going in and out because of internet.
Yes, sir. Apo.
Yes.
Ganyan
Hi,
siguro,
Cheryl.
ganyan siguro nangyayari din sa Department of Education.
Well, it also happens even during my talk webinar with the ICT. We even were hit by lost connections. So that's really the reality of that.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Leon. Thank you, Ma'am Tessie, for coming and attending.